Picture this. It's June 28th, 1778, and George Washington is riding hard toward the sound of gunfire near a place called Monmouth Courthouse in New Jersey. He expects to find his best soldiers tearing into the exposed British column. Instead, he rides straight into chaos. Thousands of his own men are running the other way, retreating with no orders, no formation, and no plan. 6 months of brutal, back-breaking work rebuilding an army from nothing is about to collapse in a single afternoon. To understand how Washington ended up on that road, watching everything fall apart, you have to rewind 6 months to a frozen camp in Pennsylvania, where his entire army nearly died before it ever fired another shot.
In December of 1777, around 12,000 men stumbled into a place called Valley Forge, and calling them soldiers was being generous. They were starving, exhausted, and barely clothed, with roughly a third of them marching without shoes on their feet. They had just been beaten badly at Brandywine and Germantown, and the British had taken Philadelphia, the capital of the young nation, without much of a fight. Congress had fled the city. Morale was gone. And now these broken men were being ordered to build a winter camp from scratch in freezing, unforgiving countryside, just 18 miles from where British officers slept in warm beds and ate hot dinners every night.
The conditions at that camp were almost impossible to imagine today. Men crammed 12 to a hut, stuffing mud into the cracks just to keep the wind out. Food disappeared for days at a time, and when it did show up, it was often rotten, spoiled by a supply system that had completely broken down under corruption and neglect. Some soldiers didn't even have pants to wear in the freezing cold. Washington later wrote that you could literally follow his army's path through the snow by the blood left behind from men marching barefoot. And disease killed more soldiers that winter than any British musket ever had, wiping out over 2,000 men, while political rivals back home quietly plotted to have Washington removed from command entirely. Then, in February of 1778, everything changed because of one strange foreign officer who barely spoke English. His name was Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, and he showed up claiming to be a former Prussian general, though the truth was a little more modest than that. It didn't matter, because the man knew exactly what he was doing. He walked out onto the frozen drill field himself, something no general of his rank would ever normally do, and started shaping soldiers with his own hands. He taught them how to stand, how to march in step, how to reload a musket fast enough to matter in real combat, and most importantly, how to actually use a bayonet as a weapon instead of a cooking skewer. What Steuben built over those brutal months wasn't just a set of new skills, it was identity. These men had spent a year being humiliated on the battlefield, running from British regulars who seemed unstoppable. Steuben gave them something to believe in, drilling the same movements over and over until discipline became instinct instead of fear. By spring, the ragged, starving group that had crawled into Valley Forge in December had quietly turned into something that actually resembled a professional fighting force. Nobody outside that camp knew it yet, but the war was about to prove whether all that training could survive real bullets. While Steuben was rebuilding the army from the inside, the entire war was shifting around them. France officially joined the fight against Britain in February of 1778, and that single decision terrified the British government. Suddenly, they couldn't focus everything on crushing the rebellion, because French warships were now a real threat across the Atlantic. London ordered its forces to abandon Philadelphia and retreat back to the safety of New York City. That retreat turned into a massive, slow-moving column of more than 20,000 people crawling across New Jersey in brutal summer heat, weighed down by wagons, cannons, and months of stolen loot. Washington saw his opportunity and broke camp immediately, sending his newly trained army chasing after the British column head-on. Washington disagreed and sent a strong advance force after the British rearguard anyway, eventually handing command of that force to Lee himself after some political back and forth. It was a decision Washington would deeply regret within just 48 hours, because what happened next nearly unraveled everything Steuben had built. On the morning of June 28th, temperatures were already climbing past 90 degrees before the sun had even fully risen. Lee advanced without a clear plan, without scouting the terrain properly, and without giving his officers any coordinated instructions. When the British commander realized what was happening, he sent his most elite troops, the Guards and Grenadiers, straight back to smash the American attack. Confusion spread fast. Some of Lee's own officers pulled troops off the field without telling him, and Lee, seeing his force falling apart, ordered a retreat that quickly turned into a disorganized, chaotic mess of soldiers running for their lives. This is the exact moment Washington rode into, and what he saw made him furious. Eyewitnesses later said he confronted Lee with language so intense that officers present described it as the harshest they had ever heard from him. But Washington didn't stop at anger. He immediately took personal command of the situation, riding straight through the retreating soldiers and physically turning the tide with sheer presence and authority. Men who had been running moments earlier suddenly stopped, turned around, and reformed into fighting positions. It was one of those rare moments in history where a single person's will visibly changed the outcome of chaos in real time. Washington quickly organized a defensive line on high ground, placing artillery with clear lines of fire and positioning his best divisions to hold the position at all costs. And then came the real test. Britain's elite grenadiers and guards, soldiers who had never once been stopped by American forces in open battle, charged forward, expecting the same collapse they'd seen at Brandywine. Instead, they ran straight into disciplined volleys, coordinated artillery fire, and soldiers who reloaded with a speed and precision that simply hadn't existed 6 months earlier. Every single attack that afternoon was repelled, and in a moment that would have been unthinkable during that freezing winter, American troops actually counterattacked with bayonets of their own. The battle raged for hours under conditions so extreme that soldiers on both sides literally dropped dead from heat alone, with dozens of recorded deaths having nothing to do with bullets or bayonets at all. By nightfall, the British quietly slipped away under cover of darkness, and Washington woke the next morning to find their positions completely empty. The battle technically ended in a draw, with neither side claiming a clear victory on paper. But that word completely misses the real story of what happened that day, because 6 months earlier, the very idea of American soldiers standing toe-to-toe with Britain's finest troops would have sounded like a joke to absolutely everyone, including their own commanders. What Valley Forge and Steuben created wasn't just a slightly better army. It was a completely different one, forged through starvation, disease, brutal training, and sheer stubborn will to survive. Monmouth wasn't the battle that won the war, but it was the moment that proved something far more important. It proved that a broken, humiliated group of farmers and laborers could be rebuilt from nothing into a force capable of matching the most feared army on Earth. And once both sides witnessed that transformation with their own eyes, there was no pretending it hadn't happened. The war would go on for years after that scorching June afternoon, but everyone involved now understood exactly what kind of army they were truly up against.